Hi there, my name's Ben and I like to read. Today we're going to be reviewing Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Wow, what a groundbreaking book. Even if there is some, or I shouldn't say some, a lot of controversy around it. Essentially, this was written by Dr. Kuhn as part of his postdoctoral fellowship. Thomas S. Kuhn was a physicist. Initially, he'd done his undergraduate and then, of course, his graduate degrees in theoretical physics. And then, as part of his postdoctorate, he essentially was given carte blanche. 4 years, blank check, go figure out what you can. And he decided, okay, instead of going with, essentially instead of being a lab rat for the next 4 years, he's like, let me go see what else the campus has to offer. So he spent a lot of time in the philosophy section and in the arts side of the campus. And of course, as you can tell, I did sciences in university. If I was in university and you told me this, I'd be like, oh my God, terrible. Why would you want to go over there? And there is sort of still that stigma to this day. But he did eventually become a very, very preeminent philosopher of science. And I think more so than any other book, this one really influenced me academically when actually looking at our scientific method. Essentially, the Structure of Scientific Revolutions breaks the quote-unquote, if I may say this dogma that scientific discovery takes place on a day-by-day gradual basis. So essentially we collect knowledge at every, piece by piece, bit by bit, and then we form a model that, along with that evidence, and of course it has to be falsifiable, we have to follow the scientific method, and so on and so forth. We have to test it to death to figure out if it's human error, if the hypothesis is wrong. It's worked well for us so far ever since we've gotten into it, and there's no reason why we shouldn't keep using it. However, Kuhn doesn't dispute the method itself, but rather he disputes that breakthroughs don't happen on a gradual day-by-day basis. They're just these one-off moments where new information just comes, and it's very, very explosive, and then this is where the paradigm shifts, and that's, of course, a word that has become a little bit of a buzzword now, one of those, really smart ones that people like to throw out without actually knowing what it means, but they probably don't even know that it was this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that coined it. And it is a Thomas S. Kuhn thing. Now, again, there's a lot to unpack with this, and when this first came out, it was deeply unpopular with the physics community, because this came out, of course, at a time where physics was considered the gold standard of science. There were a lot of people that were shocked, a lot of people that were angry, a lot of people that essentially took it as a personal attack, that they took this book as a personal attack on their whole way of thinking and interpreting the scientific method. A lot of them, essentially, what they like to do in academia, not to generalize with a broad brush, but it does happen. Of course, when someone essentially criticizes your body of work, they're used to competing for grants, competing for postdoctoral fellowships, so there's a little bit of ego there, and of course they fight for their experiments, for their findings. It's essentially like their kid. They've spent the majority of their adult lives researching this topic. They don't want to let there's of course pride of ownership within that. A lot of people engaged in ad hominem attacks on Dr. Kuhn, stating essentially that he had been corrupted by the social sciences, that there is very little scientific basis for his claims. And I think you have to sort of temper that with, again, he's writing it from a dual perspective. He's writing it as a physicist, but you have to understand that he's also writing it from a logical, from a philosophical perspective. There's no reason why there can't be an interdisciplinary marriage, if you will, between philosophy and science, because science follows the method. It's you follow the steps, and you will get an answer. Philosophy is very much the same way, especially logic, right? You have to, in philosophy, you need to construct a logical model, and if there is a problem with that logic, then your argument is going to fail. It's the same thing as, if you construct an experiment with a hypothesis and your conclusion and everything else, if there is a step in there that does not work, then your experiment collapses and you can't prove your hypothesis. So there is more that's similar between philosophy and science than we actually let on. There's a reason why it's called a social science. Upon reading this, at first I sort of had to, it was like eating a big meal. I had to really sort of just put the book down. I couldn't even look at a book for about a week afterwards, because I was just like, it's very, very heavy. It's something that, again, Kuhn is a scientist. He's not a writer. He is, this book in and of itself there's a lengthy postscript, but it's around 200 pages, but oh boy. There's no characters in this book. There's no plot to the book, so for some it may be difficult to follow. This is just, you need to sort of stay the course and just try to get to the meat of the concepts that he's trying to provide. And essentially, it's that innate discovery within every single one of us. It's not a gradual thing, because you can gradually put a little bit of sand on a pile. Eventually, you're going to get a pile of sand, right? But that's essentially all that it is. Whereas, there might be one moment where there's something so ingenious, there's something that's so electric, there's something that sends literal shockwaves throughout the whole scientific world, that people initially are going to be stunned by it, and then eventually you're going to get a lot of people who are going to oppose it. A prime example of that is Galileo and Copernicus, right? You look at that, and let's say Galileo proposes a heliocentric model, which had been proposed years in the past, and people look at this and they're like, what on earth are you talking about? You have absolutely no clue what you're talking about. Who are you? You're just some amateur, blah, blah, blah. The ad hominems start going, and of course he almost gets killed for it. Eventually, he's vindicated. Now, I think that there is a marriage to be had here. That's one example of a paradigm shift. It's probably the best known example. There is a place for marriage within, this paradigm shift and the gradual day-to-day stuff. Now, again, the paradigm shift itself doesn't happen immediately, right? There is that spark which starts to, tilt the frame, but it's only gradually that people, upon testing and upon observing and upon collecting more information about this anomaly, if you will, that eventually that anomaly becomes dogma. Now, if you were to say that, okay, the Earth is the center of the universe and everything's revolving around the Earth right now, you would get the exact same reaction that Galileo got. People would be like, what are you talking about? Of course there's this, we have this model, we've had this model for so long, how dare you speak, you incompetent inbred, and all this stuff. They'll call you down to the dirt. Now, if you can back your claims up with evidence, of course, they'll even attack your method. They'll do whatever. And there's, of course, a reason for it. It's because entrenched models, are difficult to dislodge. And the thing is, and I'm not saying that, flat earthers are right, and I'm not saying that, people who believe in, a heliocentric things are wrong or whatever. all I'm trying to say is that there is a place for civil debate within that. And I think that this book, it ignited a renaissance of philosophy of science. Like, we need to understand, okay, like, science in and of itself is not a belief system. It's not something that we can pour all of our love and our compassion into it, like, some people do with their lawns or into their families, and then expect to get, to act like a kid, throw the toys out the pram and whatever. We need to consider that we have to be as objective as possible in a subjective world. And I think that, again, when we look at the paradigm shifts that have happened, again, they are these explosive one-off events, but gradually that explosive event does end up becoming dogma, like all revolutions do. And I think that that's the one important thing to consider, is that this book, in essence, encourages us to always keep an eye out for that spark, for that one moment where the paradigm starts to shift. Because, again, if we do allow things to calcify, they eventually become dogma, and then we become no better than the church and Galileo was saying, oh, you're going against, these facts, this dogma. And if there's one thing that we know, is that we're discovering things every day in science. We're discovering so much. It's more than one person could possibly know in the entire world. And I think that this book does a really good job of putting that concept into your mind and saying, like, okay, well, we have to consider all possibilities here. We have to be open to the possibility of change within our model, because that's all that this is right now. Our entire construct of the world, our entire perception or even within our sciences is based on a model. It's based on certain key assumptions. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and we can go all day with this. The book itself, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Dr. Kuhn is not a writer, so don't expect any, fancy lyrical flair here. Even with the postscript, it's around 230 odd pages. Read the introductory essay by Ian Hacking. Read the postscript as well. I think it's an immensely important book, and I think that it should be studied for years to come. And I think that more so than for what it does for science, it does for the way that you think. And I think that it's such an important book because it forces you to confront dogma, and it forces you to be skeptical of everything. But anyway, you should give it a read. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and thanks so much for watching.